Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I have a question for you. What's the deal with sex appeal? American society is obsessed with sex, but in a sort of schizophrenic way. We sell everything from toothpaste to automobiles with sex. We look for models with ideal physiques and beautiful faces. We often dress them in as little clothing as possible to catch the eye all the more of the consumer. And yet, when somebody actually opens up about their sexual experiences or concerns, people get very uncomfortable. There's a lot of fear around sex. It's one of the most powerful experiences, but that can be scary. We have fear of intimacy, fear of its intensity, fear of performance anxiety, fear of vulnerability, fear of what other people might think about us, fear of stepping beyond our conventions and getting outside of our comfort zone. Now, we profess to care a lot about freedom. I mean, this is America, the land of the free, right? And yet, we insist on ascribing to ourselves and each other permanent labels about our inclinations and proclivities. And that's really the opposite of freedom. Our fear of difference is fundamental, and it prevents us from seeing and fully appreciating the value of diversity. How necessary diversity is in our well-being. Alfred Kinsey in the 20th century was one of the first sort of scientific researchers into human sexuality. But he started off as an entomologist. Now, Kinsey collected over 1 million samples of the American gall wasp. And what he discovered was that however similar any two gall wasps might be, no two were identical. And from this, he realized that nature not only accepts diversity, it requires it for its survival. Now, human sexuality is not static. And applying that principle, Kinsey started interviewing thousands of men and women. And he developed a scale of 0 to 6, with 0 representing exclusive heterosexuality and 6 exclusive homosexuality. And what he discovered, to his own surprise, was that almost nobody was either a 0 or a 6. That the vast majority of us fall somewhere in between those two extremes. Not only that, he discovered that the permanence of that ascription was questionable because there were circumstantial conditions where we fall on that scale might vary and move. For example, he talked about the military. All men at their sexual peak, confined without access to women of the opposite sex, they sought release. It was normal. It was expected. It's no big deal. Boarding school environments, both in Britain and in America, have been infamous for sort of the hotbed of adolescent sexuality. At an age when people are just discovering themselves and are curious and uncertain and want to explore and experiment. This is normal behavior. Margaret Mead, famous anthropologist of the 20th century, wrote a landmark book called Coming of Age in Samoa, where she studied these Pacific Islanders and their adolescence, rites of passage, and so forth. And in Samoan civilization, in Samoan culture, Sexual experimentation among adolescents is considered normal and healthy. And that was a revelation to Margaret Mead, who came from our very waspy, Protestant, Judeo-Christian, prudish society. But her discovery and her sharing of what she found actually helped trigger what was then called the sexual revolution. Where people of my generation suddenly realized, oh, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one who feels this way. Now, cultural differences do matter. And the acceptability of some behaviors is culturally specific, obviously. A real simple example, kissing babies on the mouth. Lots of American parents kiss their little children on the mouth. They don't see that as inappropriate or wrong in any way. It's a sign of affection. But a Spanish or a French parent would never kiss their child on the mouth because it's seen there as inappropriate. It's ironic because, especially in France, the attitudes towards sexuality tend to be a lot more liberal than ours. So, if I come from a country where kissing a baby on the mouth is normal and I see you do it, I'm not going to be scandalized or shocked by that. But if I come from a country where it's considered abnormal or perverse, and I see you do it, I'm becoming outraged. No matter what your intention might be. And this is not hypothetical. I mean, just 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago maybe, the Dalai Lama, one of the most revered spiritual leaders on the planet, known for his compassion and his humility and his humor and his gentleness, was imputed to have done something pedophilic. Now, we don't know actually who imputed this on social media. It could have been some Chinese effort to undermine the Dalai Lama and Buddhism, or not. It could have just been somebody who was culturally ignorant. But the actual event that triggered this was, first of all, a public event, which doesn't square with the pathology of pedophilia at all. But it was a public event. And the Dalai Lama is sitting on the dais, and a couple of seats away from him is an Indian woman, and her son was in the front row of the audience. And to the mother's embarrassment, the son stood up and asked the Dalai Lama if he could get a hug from the Dalai Lama. Now, the boy didn't speak Tibetan, and the Dalai Lama's English is not that great, so this was translated to him. And he said, sure, come on up. So he brought the child up, and he hugged him, and he tickled him, and he sort of joked around with him. And they put their foreheads together in that classic sign of sort of spiritual connection. And then the Dalai Lama did something that, for apparently some people on social media at least, was totally shocking. He stuck out his tongue. He went, and then he said, now suck my tongue. And he said it in English. And it's unfortunate the word he chose was suck, because that has more blatant sexual connotations for a lot of people. But the actual Tibetan expression is eat my tongue, and it's part of a blessing that is common from an elder to a child or grandchild. The tongue being the source of the wisdom that I transmit to you, now you eat my tongue in the sense of you imbibe my teaching, make it your own. That was the context of what happened. But it was totally misconstrued on social media, and this kind of thing can be incredibly damaging. Now, fortunately, in this case, it wasn't, because the Dalai Lama is way too wise and smart to let it be. And when he was informed of the furor over this, he immediately apologized for his bad translation, and, nobody thought the worse of him. But this is an example of how ignorance can be so damaging. You know? We have a double standard about nudity. There's another hot topic. Yeah. In Florida, an elementary school principal was fired because a group of good Christian mothers got terribly upset that their 6th grade children were shown a photograph of Michelangelo's David. Now, anybody who knows anything about history or art knows that statue is one of the most famous works of art in the entire Western world, in all of history. It's absolutely spectacular. It's 18 feet tall, carved from a single block of white Carrara marble by Michelangelo when he was only 26 years old. And it depicts the moment where David, adolescent David, is facing the giant Goliath and is about to shoot him with a slingshot and kill him. It's a spiritually significant moment in biblical history. But apparently that didn't matter to these good Christian mothers because all they could see was a penis. It's sort of ironic too, because their ignorance is doubled by the fact that whoever the model for Michelangelo's David was, he certainly wasn't Jewish, because that's no Jew. The whole issue of nudity is so hypocritical. You know, what could be more natural to any of us than our bodies? I mean, after all, it's the one thing we're all born with, right? And yet our attitudes towards exposing it are all over the map. The Greeks and Romans, like people today, admired beauty and physical strength, and Greco-Roman men would exercise in the gymnasium, and they would exercise in the nude, partly because it's a hot climate. That was the culture, that was the tradition. Jewish men in Palestine who wanted to be assimilated into Greco-Roman culture would also go to the gymnasium and exercise in the nude. But that was a problem, because Greek and Roman men are not circumcised. And in fact, in their culture, the exposure of the tip of the penis was seen as something lewd and lascivious and inappropriate in public. So the Greco-Roman men ridiculed all the Jewish men because they were circumcised, and you could see the tips of their penises. And this was so humiliating to the Jews that some of them sought surgical reversal of their own circumcision so that they could fit in socially. I mean, we take these things to ridiculous extremes, and that's nothing new. Does our discomfort with our own physicality, with our unexpressed or unrecognized feelings, explain all this? Does it explain the restroom dramas about fueling laws that restrict gender-based bathroom use? I mean, really. If you go and travel in France or Spain, you know, you go into a cafe, you look for the restroom, and very often what you'll find is 2 stalls, one with a male image, one with a female image, but in a common bathroom with a common sink. And you're just as apt to walk in there and find someone of the opposite sex exiting one of the stalls, and nobody thinks twice about it. You nod hello, you wash your hands, you do your business, and you leave. And yet here, all of a sudden, we're horrified, terrified that, oh my God, the children, the poor children. We don't care about children being shot, but we're terrified that the 1% of the population who might be trans are going to do something inappropriate to our children in a restroom. The statistical probability of being molested in a restroom are infinitesimally small. But the largest cause of death among children in the United States today is from gun violence. We are out of balance. This is ridiculous. And this is ignorant. Social media has a lot to do with this because it can fuel our fears. Now, don't get me wrong. I think social media are a great thing, I'm recording a video for social media. It can be a very positive way of sharing information. It can be a way for some people to express things that they might not have been comfortable expressing face-to-face with someone else. But it can backfire. We're not really anonymous even when we're on social media. And that ends up undermining our sense of privacy. Privacy is important. Privacy provides a safe space for us to absorb, digest, and process our emotions and our feelings. We need some privacy. We need intimacy to grow emotionally. And the social media can undermine both of those. But we need to regain an appreciation for the value of intimacy. We need to regain a sense of respect of each other's privacy. And we need to be able to expand our comfort zone without having to lie or hide our true feelings and experiences in the process. This requires building trust in ourselves as well as in each other. We're too often way too afraid of what other people will think about us if we speak honestly. But learning to do that tends to be an incremental process. In any case, the more comfortable we become with ourselves, the more comfortable we become and the more accepting we become of others. And that's actually the key to the real deal about sex appeal. The real deal to fulfillment in general. Our attractiveness, both individual and social, and all positive change, for that matter, begins with our own self-experience. Embracing the reality of that experience banishes fear and frees us to live more fully. Thanks for listening.